The next point, the next step on this agenda is a talk. And the topic is electricity generation shift towards renewables reaching new peaks, with the Nordics in lead, with their available financing opportunities. And I'd like to welcome back on stage Niclas Holmberg. Please take a seat here. One of the thrones, it almost looks like, a beautiful chair. And Martin Sandgren, again, please, there you are. Martin, please take a seat. And we have with us also a new person on stage, Rafael Guedez. You are a senior researcher at KTH Energy Department. Please take a seat. Wonderful. Applause, please.
Hi. Hi, Niclas. Hi. Nice meeting you.
So it's wonderful to have a researcher scientist with us on this stage. That's, well, some of you are also, of course, but we need your expertise in this panel. Sweden and the Nordics have an impressive, as we know, energy mix when it comes to renewables in comparison with many other regions in the world. And this fact is well known and draws attention, of course, from many actors, stock exchange, regulators, investors, and also to be in the forefront as we are. Niclas and Nasdaq, I'd like to start with you. How can this ecosystem benefit and promote this development that we're already seeing? How can your ecosystem that you're within them in Nasdaq really sort of enhance this what we see, this movement?
First of all, we are more like a generalist in terms of try to cover all the sectors. So we try to be there and try to understand what's happening in the market. And now when we have listed almost 15 companies for the last 2 years, we learn a lot. We are now members of Cleantech Scandinavia. We try to get all the kind of stats and information, talking to the broader investment base, institutional money, but also Avanza Nordnet, and to try to understand the trends in this sector. But in the end, we are not the stock picking guys. We are more like a platform. So what we want to do is create visibility for the company that lists with us, put them in front maybe of US investors. We have an ESG event in October in New York, where invite together with Energimyndigheten. And we also try to, today I have a meeting with Berenberg, the German bank, to talk about if you're looking for opportunities to invest in this sector, you should look at Stockholm. You have the peers here, you have the upcoming companies, so that is our way of, contribute to have the growth. And so I think that's a really good complement to the private side.
Thank you. Martin, you have talked about, given us some good examples on the regulatory difficulties, but how can you, as incentivize in your framework, enhance this even further? I mean, this talk was of great value for the listeners, of course, but how can you, in your position, even further this development?
I mean, what we can do is to help identify the risks and the opportunities from a legal, regulatory, and wider policy perspective. I mean, we work quite broadly there. So we both are involved with government initiatives when they're looking at new types of legislation and projects within this area. So that's on the policy side. For the development of it, commenting on new legislations where you need that, but more importantly, on the individual basis with investors and other players in the market for individual investments or technologies or products to identify them in more detail than I did here. I just highlighted a few ones. So that's where we can provide the most value in a due diligence exercise when somebody's buying or investing, or when you're going to put this on the stock exchange with that industry's perspective, which we have.
Thank you. And Rafael, from your scientist perspective, how can you help further this development?
Well, I think the research community has a lot to do in creating awareness as a non-biased entity for stakeholders and here industry, but also the state agencies like Energimyndigheten or so on, right? So, I mean, for instance, one of the risks, like Martin was saying, is we can learn from other countries who have deployed a lot of renewables. And then I see here that we're talking about investment at technology level and also at project level. So it's interesting that it's important to know that there should be policies, targeting both. Projects need to be developed, and then that means that we need to promote policies so that investors can invest in projects based on new technologies, so not only the mature technologies, for instance, and we don't have such a strong policies for that, besides all the risks that Martin already mentioned. So we can support the stakeholders in letting them know, yes, these are new technologies, this is how they compare to each other, but also this is how they can, in order for them to go through the valley of death, because we are very innovative in Sweden, right? But in order for them to survive through this valley of death, like after developing the technology, we need also the policy. We need to let them know, like, okay, this is the type of projects where they would benefit, and this is the type of schemes that could work to support these type of technologies, for instance. So I think that's one of the myriad roles that we can play as a university, for instance.
If we have in one hand regulations and the other one hand we have investments, how do you value this? I mean, what do we really need the most? Is it both? Or, I mean, please give us your view on this. I mean, obviously here are many investors, but we also need regulations, right, Martin? And what could they look like?
Yeah, I mean, you need both. I mean, what is, to a large extent driving this now is a combination of regulation and investment. So regulation is enabling investment or channeling money. So it basically has to do with the overall, Paris Accord and the other initiatives to reduce CO2 emissions. Some of that is through soft legislation, and some is through much firmer. So it varies between countries. Some have legislated on legally binding CO2 emission targets. Some have not. In Sweden, it's a bit of a mixture. So I think it's more there, and I strongly believe that that regulation should be technology neutral, in the sense that the government should not say, now it's wind, now it's solar, or whatever it is, but set up the goals. These are the goals we need to reach, and then it's up to the technology to develop the best technology to reach that goal. But then that might be in combination with dedicated government grants for basic research, primarily, and sometimes for applied research when it's becoming, in the second stage of before full commercialization.
I think from the investment side, it's again related to tech, because we have Spotify, Klarna, iSettle, and so on. We have so many really good examples. So the appetite of invest in tech comes a lot from that side. So now when we see good examples like PowerCell, Climion, and so on, have a good journey on the stock exchange, that of course gives a lot of attention, and that means that would attract a lot of good opportunities for other companies to be part of the fantastic journey that other companies like PowerCell and they had. So I think we need to have this. It's very important to have these really great examples.
And there's much word coming out now from the EU in terms of taxonomy and the new Green Deal. How would you say that this affects the market?
Well, if I might add something there, I think coming back to one of the issues that the CEO of Absolicon raised, right? It's electricity is not also everything. And then one of the trends we see from it's to electrify almost everything. That's one of the trends nowadays. It's important also that, coming back to the last question, regulation also, it's promoting, renewable heat, renewable transportation. And then, taxes is one of the ways to achieve that. So from a research point of view, I think it's very interesting to see what will happen when we set specific targets promoted to taxes or anything at industry level, because that will really create a change. And then coupled to that is we can learn from other countries in the way that, we can continue to promote renewable electricity, but our current infrastructure is limited. So infrastructure is also something that needs to be supported. And then that's coupled to storage policies and so on, which in our country, we're very at the forefront of being agnostic and so on in terms of technology, but we don't have really strong policies for incorporating new storage, for instance, because we have hydro, but hydro will only cover the big transmission, not the distribution problems. So
we for sure have lots of distribution problems. I live in southern Sweden. There's lots of less investments in industries in that region, we know for sure, in this region because of transmission problems. How about risks? Which would you see are the major risks in investing in renewables, and how could you best manage the risks? I'm looking at you, Niclas, obviously.
Oh, yeah. That's a question that we discuss within the team a lot. Again, we are very proud, not just me working for NASDAQ, but I started when I was 15 years old and invested in early stage companies. So I think that the appetite for investing in growth companies really stands out for Swedes compared to you just need to move to Denmark and they're saving in their property or saving accounts. In the end, the reason for the growth is, of course, because it had been a good journey for the most of the people saving in equity. So now when we have so many new companies coming to the stock market in early stage, I hope that investors really take time to diversify their portfolio, because for sure not all of these companies would fly. So what we're trying to do is to help companies to need to understand that the shareholders, they are the best friends. They need how to communicate to the market, even if you're not selling your product for 1 year, maybe you can talk about the market in general. So more related to that, we are not really saying that you should invest in that company, but not in that one. That's not the exchange rule.
Of course. In terms of keeping oneself informed about what's going on in this market, how can researchers, and for instance KTH, be a provider, a good source of knowledge and information on what is actually going on in terms of innovation?
Yeah, you're right. I think one of the possibilities, of course, would be any consulting that is working on that, but another that is very close to investors or policymakers, and especially us being a state-owned university, it's we're non-biased. So we look into different technologies for generation, that meaning solar, thermal generation, or wind, etc. Also storage, and then also in the distribution and transmission, and we see how they compare. When is one technology better than the other, if that word fits? What values they offer, how the market can approach them, and so on. And we can, of course, work close, or my department at least, the energy department, we're trying to work close with industry such that either through research projects, but also we could, ad hoc provide services to see, well, this is how your technology will compare, or this is how other technologies are doing, whether you're an investor or a technology that is developing something or so on.
Thank you. Do we have any questions in the room that would like to be addressed to the panel? I didn't enter saying that in the beginning. Yes, we have one question over here. And we need a microphone for the people following on the broadcast. Emma, let's see. Or somebody else in that corner. Otherwise, I'll just pop up. Here we go. In the middle here. Hands up, please. Thank you.
I've forgotten my question now. No, kidding. Any comments on the taxonomy proposal by the EU? For me, it seems like a great idea, but I thought experts in the field, is it something that you think will enhance investment?
Thank you. I've touched briefly on the taxonomy before, but please, who would like to answer the taxonomy? It's fairly new, all the propositions coming out. I think maybe you would like to add something to that, Martin?
Yeah, and I'm thinking about that myself, and we're analyzing that. I think it's very hard to say really what effect it will have. I mean, we need to look at the details of the implementation too, and the long-term effects. So I think it's unfortunately, at least from my perspective, too early to tell. So tentatively, yes, but I don't think it will have a huge impact.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Yes, one over here to the side. It's okay. I can. You're all right?
Thanks a Thanks. I just have a question about some of the developments on the technology sides are happening so quickly, and there's a lot of new innovation there. But then you look at the sort of the policy mix side, and the trends around developments there are slower or sluggish. And one of the the gentleman there about permitting came up as an example before. So in Sweden, in the context here, is there enough institutional capacity to bring the investors together with the technology innovators, together with the R&D, together with the policymakers to really create a kind of a sandbox approach where you can get the right policy mix accelerated on a faster basis?
Thank you.
I'm not 100% sure if I understand the question, but what we try to do, if you look into the institutional investor base in Sweden related to the rest of the Europe, when you hear about AP-fond, AP4, our state-owned pension fund, invest 1 million euro in a clean tech company, and you explain that for people C-level. I came from the EU C-level meeting talking about growth, and you meet the rest of they have never heard about that. But also the small and micro-cap funds. I was talking to a Swiss advisor, and she said, yeah, our small cap fund, they invest in 500 million euro companies and above. And here you have a complete different level. So when you look into Sweden, what really stands out, that we have built everything from legal advisors, financial advisors like Naventus, but also small and micro-cap funds. They are invested in a space that is not happening in the rest of Europe. So that's dynamic behind our phenomenous ecosystem, that every piece of the ecosystem have working with growth company. And again, I think that comes, of course, because of the success from Spotify, Klarna, and so on. So we have an appetite and interest to follow, be part of a growth journey.
Thank you. Please,
just
Martin.
one small
Yes.
additional comment there to the governmental access aspect of that question. Yeah, I think relatively speaking, and I've worked in quite a few countries. I mean, Sweden is a very transparent company. The economy and the political system is transparent and non-hierarchical. So you would find here, compared to many other countries in the world, that it's easy to get access to politicians, to departments, even if they do not have formal hearing rounds or so for a development of a certain technology or a certain problem. I mean, it's not as easy to just call them up, but it is quite transparent. So you can do it yourself, or you can do it with their lobbyist advisors, but it's quite informal. And I think you would find that, relatively speaking, it's pretty easy to get that. And where it's most important to do it, I think, is where there would be then a sort of a need for either a regulation or a specific support for government infrastructure investments. The transmission system here is one example of that. So very simply put, if you're developing a technology for power generation, there is less need for it, but when the physical infrastructure which transports those things around the country, that's basically one way or the other governmental responsibility. So if it's the interface with that, where I think is most important to have that dialogue.
Thank you. Rafael, from your research perspective, in terms of innovation, if you look in the 10 years ahead, what do you see? In terms of renewable technology, obviously.
I think storage. If I have to choose one word, it's storage. And then myriads of technologies of storage here, like electrochemical is one, thermal is another, chemical, like hydrogen or so on, they will all play a role here. So to really get to the goals, I mean, Sweden is aiming for 100% renewable electricity by 2040. Well, we need a storage then for that. And we need policies in place, infrastructure in place to do that. So transmission and local distribution need to be established to support these storage technologies.
Thank you. You'll get the same question, by the way, so please, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. In addition to, general more efficient use of electricity, power, and energy. Here we have not talked so much about the agricultural industry. If we're looking at reaching the CO2 emission targets, that's as important. But yeah, storage. I've said since I started to work as an advisor to the renewables industry that the guy production I think we've solved fundamentally. But if you could advance the microchip for energy storage, the equivalent of that's what would change the entire game.
Thank you, Martin. Niclas, would you like to add? It's a bit tricky from your position, maybe, but what would you expect from, let's say, the market?
No, I think that what's shown today, hearing all the company talking, is a broad mix of different solutions to the climate problem, and for me to pick the winner, I think that will be a mix of everything. So again, to all these brave, fantastic entrepreneurs, I have not been smart myself to start a company, but I'm just happy to work in a system that works very well. So I hope that will continue in the future as well.
Well, thank you very much. Those are great final words for this panel up here, and give them a warm applause.
Thank you.